to start recording right now. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Susan Reynolds. I'm with Friends for Survival. Today is Tuesday, July 7th, and we are very honored to have Franklin Cook with us today. Franklin has been a peer grief helper since 1999, first working exclusively with the suicide bereaved, and then also helping U.S. military families bereaved by any manner of death. For the past 3 years, Franklin has specialized in peer grief support for people bereaved by a death from substance abuse, and now manages SADOD, which stands for Support After a Death by Overdose, which is a statewide project funded by the Massachusetts Bureau of Substance Addiction Services that is implementing peer grief support services for family members, people in recovery, and frontline care providers affected by substance use fatalities. Franklin is an experienced program developer, trainer, and advocate in his field, and has served on the board of directors of the Suicide Prevention Action Network and the Alliance of Hope for Suicide Loss Survivors. He's also co-led the Survivors of Suicide Loss Task Force of the National Action Alliance of Suicide Prevention, which in 2015 published national guidelines for suicide grief support. Franklin supports practice of peer grief help in memory of his father, Joseph, who died by suicide in 1978 after a lifelong struggle with alcoholism. So thank you so much, Franklin, for being here. And I do want to tell everyone who's attending, if you'd like to post questions anytime during the webinar, go ahead and post them in the section to the right of your screen, and we will answer those as we go. So Marilyn, turning it over to you.
Good, thank you. Thank you. I am delighted to have Franklin with us. We met at an AAS conference in about 2001, we think. And yes. He's had an illustrious career since then. We've maintained friendships, and our paths have crossed a great deal through AFSP, AAS. He also helped, he's a contributor to our book on pathways to purpose and hope about a sustainable and effective suicide prevention program and structure. So we've had a lot of times together, and I'm always amazed at all of the things that he gets into, a lot more than I do. And so let's talk a little bit about it. Both of us got involved because we were affected by a suicide death. And tell me a little bit about your dad, and you very shortly how you actually, what caused you to even think about doing this?
Well, he was 49 years old, and that was in 1978. So I was 24 years old when he died 41 years ago. And my dad was a high-functioning alcoholic his whole life, but he was an alcoholic his whole life, and he struggled with that. And the summer before he died, he had a major depressive episode, which is what killed him. He really, truly had one of those depressive episodes where a person, loses weight and can't sleep and is actually psychotic, delusional. And he wound up being hospitalized, and he actually died in a psychiatric hospital on suicide watch. And it was years later before I got involved in all this. It was 20 years after that before I got involved in all of this. So, and I got involved in all of this myself, to answer your question directly, because I'd had my own, variety of kinds of emotional, mental, interpersonal issues over that 20 years. And I wound up going to a peer grief support group 21 years after my dad died. And that peer grief help support group, even though that was way down the road, was a life-changing experience. Even though I'd been bereaved by the time for 20 years, I'd never been around people. I'd maybe met a handful of people over those years who'd lost someone, but the reason I became a peer grief helper is because peer grief help was a remarkable experience in my life. It was just a remarkably powerful healing experience in my life.
Well, I think that that's true. You and I both are advocates of peer support. And when we started 37 years ago, it was not looked on as a very, I don't know what we're going to say, very competent way, a very professional way of helping people. Peer
It was looked down upon, is what you mean to say.
Yes, that's the truth. We were like we were down on the list, far down on the list, and not acceptable.
Yeah.
But we were determined that there are a lot of ways to help grieving people, and peer support is one of them, and it's an important one, but it's not the only one. But in those days,
no, not at all, not at all.
The professionals thought, I think they weren't experienced in peer support. It wasn't popular. I think the only thing that was out there was AA, and that was kind of it. And so consequently, it never been really applied to suicide survivors except in a couple of little places in the United States.
Yeah, when you got started, there were only a handful of people doing it that I know of.
Yeah, just a handful.
And even though things have come just a handful, truly. And even now, even though there are hundreds of peer grief support groups in the United States for suicide and for other kinds of grief, it still has a long way to go as far as being accepted by professionals or being understood, or especially being applied as universally as it could be applied. The vast majority of people, can have a grief experience, even a profound grief experience, and not need a clinician. There's nothing wrong with going to a clinician, and clinical help is sometimes vital, but the vast majority of people can experience their grief and in a healthy way, if you want to put it that way, without going to a clinician. And peer grief help is an important component of that.
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk a little bit about your background. I know for a long time when I was aware of the fact that you were active in South Dakota. You were in South Dakota. Now you're in the Boston area. Basically, but you were in South Dakota for quite a few years, and you had kind of a unique experiences there. I would guess we never really talked about it, but you were working with the Native American community. Can you talk a little bit about that, because you have an alcohol problem too? That's common knowledge.
Well, some do, certainly. Some do and some don't. But I guess for me, that support group that I went to it would have been probably around August of 1999, I very quickly, and maybe too quickly in some ways, and very quickly started to co-facilitate. Maybe at first I would say I helped the facilitator and then became a co-facilitator over not very much time. But then not too long after that, we decided, me and about 7 or 8 other people in suicide prevention, started a little organization called the Front Porch Coalition, a local suicide prevention coalition in Rapid City, South Dakota. So that wound up to be it's still a going concern. I was their executive director for a few years. That's how I got into the business. Is I started a coalition and funded, wrote a grant to get a salary. So I was in the newspaper work. I was a copy editor for a daily newspaper. And since then, that's all I've done, is worked in either suicide prevention or suicide grief support. I always wanted just to work in suicide grief support, but it's only recently that I've done that. That's all I do now is grief support, peer grief support for suicide and for substance use death. But I was in South Dakota till 2010 or 2011. So I helped manage a couple of statewide grants. There was some funding. Well, I don't know if it's still going, but Garrett Lee Smith Memorial Act funding was a big thing around starting in 2004 or so. And we had 2-3-year grants, statewide grants, and I helped manage those. And that took me out into Indian country and doing assist training, applied suicide intervention skills training, and doing other kinds of work with tribal people. So my service area was the Black Hills, and the Black Hills, I mean, I don't know what percentage of people in the Black Hills are Native American, but that's their home, you know. So even though that's not a reservation, there's 4 reservations within a couple hours drive of there, and I worked on those.
So
In suicide prevention, not so much in grief support, although we did some of that.
yes. So then you've moved to, so let's talk about what you're doing now. You moved to Boston Boston area anyway, a few years ago. And now recently, I know a couple of years ago, you started with helping families, bereaved families after opioid deaths, which is now a big thing. I just heard something on National Public Radio about how bad it was, the last statistics in 2018 were horrible, and they expect it's going to even be worse now. So,
yeah, well, I moved here in the summer of 2011. So this summer it'll be 9 years since I've been. I live in Watertown, Massachusetts, right outside Boston, where the marathon bomber was captured, to orient people to where I'm at, if that is any help. But in any event, I came here and continued to do the kind of work that I had been doing, mostly in suicide prevention. Again, I helped do some men's suicide prevention, and I got a couple contracts with the Department of Public Health. And here's how I would characterize it. Most of my work in suicide grief support, and I did a ton of it, was volunteer work. I rarely got paid up until recently. It's not that I never got paid, but basically, as you know, it's not a big money venture if you're in peer grief help. So up until 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, the majority of my work was in suicide prevention. So when I was working for the Department of Public Health, they knew all about my grief work, because that's when we did the national the national strategy around grief support. So I co-led the team that wrote that. And so the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services folks here knew of my work in the grief world, and they were concerned about the effect of opioid deaths on frontline care providers. And so that's how 3 years ago, well, now it's longer than that, I started my first pilot project. And now I've done 3 pilot projects, and I run a really, good sized project now that grew out of that pilot work. So basically I did 3 different pilots with 3 different audiences. One is frontline care providers, who are people who work directly in the streets, basically, not literally, but pretty much needle exchanges and substance use counseling in areas where there's high intensity drug use. And so that's one audience, frontline care providers. The other is us, bereaved people, who go to support groups in communities and lose family members and all that. The other group is people who have a history of drug use. So whether you are in recovery, or whether you are struggling with drugs and alcohol, or whether you're still using, if you're in the world of opioid use, then you're experiencing fatalities, and it's having an effect on you. So we work with those 3 different audiences around grief. Like our most recent intensive project was standing up virtual support groups for families. So we have they're not SADOD, support after a death by overdose. They're not our groups, but we provide them intensive technical assistance and training, and all kinds of things. So our directory, we have 17 groups that are having virtual. We have 25 meetings a month in Massachusetts.
wow.
And we've stood those up over the last. They have. I shouldn't say we have. We've helped them all we can, But that's what we do. That's one of the things that we do, is help people with training, all in peer grief support. I'm only a peer grief support person.
So is there a difference between families that have been affected by an actual obvious suicide death and those who are grieving a death of someone that died by opiates? Is there any?
Yeah. I guess what I would say, Marilyn, is that that's what got me into this world, is because people knew intuitively that there were similarities. You know, that one of the main similarities is that they are both stigmatized deaths. Okay. So if you lose a loved one to suicide, as many people, not everybody has the same experience. I'm not saying that, but many of us uh, experience a lot of stigma over our person's, you know, mental health, or over our own, um, responsibility, or however people see that. There's a lot of stigma because suicide is associated with mental illness. There's a lot of stigma around a death by suicide. People know that pretty well. Well, the same is true for someone who dies using drugs, if you will. There's just a ton of stigma around that. So one of the main similarities is that bereaved people who lose a loved one to suicide or to substance use in some way are stigmatized. So people are judgmental about them. People don't know how to do the regular rituals, like sending a card or bringing a casserole, or whatever. There's some kind of taboo associated with suicide and with drug and alcohol use that leaves stigmata, which is where the word stigma comes from, a mark, on people who are bereaved. And there's a ton people who are watching this know all about that. All about that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the main similarities. And there's a lot of similarities. I guess there's more similarities, than differences. But I think if you look at why my person died, it's a different kind of mental illness, if you will, to say my person died of addiction or of substance use, than my person died of depression or schizophrenia or whatever. But a lot of the interpersonal things that happen to people about being disenfranchised or not getting the help they need or whatever, there's ton of similarities between the two. So yeah, it's definitely different to have your person die of substance use, but they are very, very similar kinds of grief. Like when somebody dies of suicide, one of the things that we wonder as bereaved people is, well, what role did my person play in that, right? Well, of course, they're the ones who did it, right? But what was that a free choice? Did they wits about them? Were they in their right mind, or how much control did they have? That's a huge factor in people's grief journey. Well, the same is true in substance use death, where people wonder, well, is addictive behavior something that's within the person's control? So it's just similar, but also some subtle and not so subtle differences between the two.
Yeah, and there's always the lack of feeling like we should have been responsible. We should have been able to help them get over the addiction or get help with the mental illness or the depression. We should have done something different. So we beat ourselves up a lot. Yeah,
if you pile all of the anger and guilt that people experience who are bereaved by suicide and who are bereaved by substance use death, you're going to have a big pile of anger and guilt. Not everybody, again, everybody has their own experience. Not everybody feels those emotions, but many people whose person dies by suicide feel guilty or feel responsible or blame others. And the same is true of someone who dies from a death from substance use. I mean, you'll hear, again, it's different, just say my person should have been to treatment and they wouldn't let him in, or they kicked him out, or whatever. There's different, the stories are different, but the guilt and blame is very can be for the people who are affected by guilt and blame and anger at the person. It's very hard to be angry at a person. People who are bereaved know this, that bereaved by suicide know that if they experience that really terrible, really terrible anger at the person for for not taking care of business or whatever it is, they know how much that really complicates our grief journey, that we have to really figure out how to still have a relationship with that person, and how to, I don't know if resolve it is the right word, but but how to find our own perspective on what happened, so that we can grieve and have a relationship with the person in their absence. The work of grief is to form a healthy relationship with your person in their absence. I mean, that's how I would put it. I don't mean to define grief for other people, but the work of grief, as far as I know, or at least one major piece of it, is to figure out what my relationship is with my person. Not just figure it out, but to have a relationship with my person. So even though the person is gone physically, I still have a relationship. My dad still influences who I am. My dad still informs what I do. My dad and I are still working stuff out, now not literally like I would if you and I were having an issue we needed to work out, but in my mind and in my heart, my dad and I have whether or not we recognize it. Again, I'm saying, my point of view. Other people may look at this differently, but we carry our dead with us, and that's figurative language, but especially if they're a family member, it's extraordinarily true that you carry their DNA, or they carry your DNA, however you want to look at it. Well, that's just one aspect of how we carry our people with us. And if we learn how to do that in a way that's, I don't know, meaningful. I mean, it's hard at first. They're just gone, and them being gone is all that there is at first, and that is about the worst feeling in the world. So part of going beyond that is figuring out how they're still here, and again, I don't want to be too literal, it's what we construct in our own mind, or our own emotional center, or our own story of our lives, how our people are here with us. So that's a big part of healing. That's according to Franklin, so
Franklin's
yeah.
good. Franklin's good.
Well,
Always makes me stop and think. Franklin, have you what is your kind of perspective on how drugs and alcohol? I mean, alcohol is, drugs are now a little bit more the alcohol is totally, I mean, it's a culture. It's just considered, part of living, going to the bars and, parties and all that sort of thing. So how do you think that do you think, what kind of an awareness should we have as grieving people about about allowing or having family members, say, for instance, who have addictions to alcohol and or any kind of other drugs? I mean,
well, there's a big topic.
It's a slippery slope, and I actually have, I have some family members that have a
sure
alcohol problem. I mean, very, very serious alcohol problem, and there's nothing anybody can do. I mean, you can be supportive and caring and encouraging and everything else, but the bottom line is I can't keep them from drinking or drugs. So got any helpful suggestions on how do we manage that, or how do we keep ourselves from falling into that ditch?
I don't know if I hope what I talk about has answers in it. I don't know if I would try and answer that head on like that, like how we manage that or how we keep ourselves from, from falling into that, because that is a huge topic. But what I would say is that, I've both thought about this and worked with people regarding this and had my own experience regarding this, for thousands of hours, of of grappling with the topic that we're talking about. And it is really, I think there's really a couple things that people can think about, at least in their own experience, which is that one of the reasons we use drugs or drink alcohol when we're bereaved is because we are in pain. Okay. So almost everything that we do that can cause some little escape is in response. Oh, I'm talking about bereavement specifically, is in response to how much pain we feel. So alcohol and drugs are in that category. I mean, some people binge watch TV, some people eat, some people gamble, some people shop, but whatever we do to like turn it off is where that becomes a problem, because there's nothing wrong with any of the things I said, watching TV or drinking or using drugs, in certain ways. Our society, does that, and people do that, safely or healthily or whatever. So it's not that those things are inherently a problem, and they can even be helpful to help you step back from your pain. But if you are only avoiding your pain, and I don't mean that judgmentally, it's natural. We are wired to avoid pain. We are wired to avoid pain. But if you are only avoiding pain through secondary outer things, whatever it is, then you're not having the full experience. So basically, that's one thing to think about, is what am I missing? What am I missing? What good is this pain? And the pain is part of the experience, and it's where I think great meaning and great wisdom comes from experiencing the pain. I don't mean that we should just bear the pain and that's all, or that we should just, whatever comes, just succumb to it. But avoiding it over time costs bereaved people. It's, maybe not everybody. I'm just speaking from my own experience, that that there's value in feeling how you feel. So that's one part of it. The other part of it, though, has to do, we mix these things up. The other part of it has to do actually with addiction, or with alcohol disorder or whatever, where you actually, again, in my view, have a disease that you don't have a choice about it. So that's a whole different, I mean, these two things are interrelated. But if you are using alcohol and or drugs in a way that is debilitating you, or that is ruining other kettle of fish, because you need some help, you need some help to do that, to do that differently. That's besides whatever it's doing to your grief isn't good, but besides whatever it's doing to your grief, if you have an addictive disorder, then that is very, very debilitating. That is a chronic and fatal, debilitating disease when it's at its worst. Everybody has their own, versions or whatever, but the worst manifestation of addictive disorder is a chronic, fatal disease. So, you need some help.
Right.
So kind of, we're talking about people who are, in kind of, not that there's just a clean line between the two categories or whatever, but there's kind of two different issues. What am I doing around my pain? And am I addicted to alcohol? Two different questions.
I don't know, I think about some of my family history of my own and my father, the father to my children, and see a heavy addiction to alcohol. And it was
Yeah.
very, even if it doesn't end up in death or suicide, the cost and the pain that is experienced by everyone around them is just horrendous. And it seems like some families have a bigger tendency to be addicted than others. And I don't know how much is that natural or how much of that is nurturing and modeling.
Well,
But it,
yeah, I don't, you know, I don't know myself. I mean, my father was an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic. Me, I and two of my brothers are in recovery from addictive disorder. So that's just one family though. So we can't really say, but a part of the problem is that our society is swimming in alcohol and drugs. Our society has normalized, well, you don't want to go too far with this, because when you look at the worst part of it, right, that is because using alcohol is accepted the way it's accepted. You know, that's one of the reasons why we have the severity of problems that we have, is because alcohol and drug use are accepted the way they are accepted throughout our culture. You know, they're part of the rites of passage, and they're part of how we deal with our anxiety, and they're part of our entertainment, and they're part of our celebration, and you know, that's something that we do, and it has a downside, you know.
yeah, it's
So
it's too easy. It's kind of like
for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people, it has a
it's
downside.
just so easy and it's so available. It's kind of like having somebody that is suicidal and there's a gun in the house. You know, it's like it's just too easy. It's just too easy to pick that gun up if you're feeling really suicidal. And that's one that talked about in suicide prevention, is to get the guns out of the house. But
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can't
I
get rid of
mean,
the alcohol. It's on every corner. There's a liquor store
yeah,
everywhere.
yeah, yeah. I think it behooves bereaved people to think about. We call it numbing behavior in general when we talk about the whole list. I think it's important for bereaved people to think about what their numbing behavior is, and if they are overusing it, or if they are using it to their own detriment, whether it's alcohol, drugs, TV binging, or any of that other list that we talk about. If when the yearning for my person rises up within me to the point where I start to get that feeling in my chest, that I know it's going to get me weeping or feeling like I'm smothered, or whatever that is, if I never just let myself feel that with support, you know, with support, then I think that if you're always avoiding your grief by using numbing behavior, that's worth looking at. You know, that is absolutely, I recommend, you know, that you take a,
and get some professional help
well, it
besides.
depends, you know, again, if you're there's a continuum here, you know, if you're
Yes.
over on this side where it's a disorder, definitely, you know, and somewhere over here, you know, maybe it's just a matter of, oh, okay, I need to not do it that way, you know, and get some help from your circle of people.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people do call us, and I think that goes back to how a peer support can be an encouragement to not go into the things that are very unhealthy for us in our grief. We
Well,
can encourage and know that other people understand our pain enough that they can be
yes.
helpful to one another. We can all hold each other up And that's the value of peer support. And it's usually inexpensive. It usually is free. Most of the times.
Usually.
You can't.
Well,
Yeah.
I think, Marilyn, that's like what you just said is probably as important a thing as we've said, you know, during our conversation here. Because now think about the hundreds of experiences you've had as a peer grief helper, either one-on-one with someone who experiences that deep pain, and you hold a space for them to experience that, to catch their breath, to reflect on, you know, to come out of it and to have that whole experience, to talk about it, to say where that came from and what you miss that caused you to feel that way. Or in a group setting, to have someone totally, you know, feel the depths of their loss and express that. If there's peer helpers there to help them not be, you know, overcome by that, overwhelmed by that, or damaged by that, and hold a space for them to feel that, and then to see that other people feel that, and to reflect on that, and see that other people are finding meaning in working their way through this. That is how peer help works. We see other people have experiences that we think either make us crazy or are going to kill us, or, you know, it doesn't feel survivable. People, you know, people who experience acute deep grief, you know what I'm talking about. But to see other people do that, or to be with other people who will hold us, you know, whether that's literally or hold a space for us while we do that, and then we catch our breaths, and then we're able also to reflect on that. We're also able to listen to other people reflect on what happened when that happened to them, and to talk about, because it's a connection to our loved one. The reason we feel that way is because we love our person. The reason we feel grief is because we love our person. Well, then the love of your person is down inside that pain too, you know. And again, I'm talking kind of figuratively here, or, well, I don't know. I don't know. It's not really figurative to me. Like the pain that we feel in grief is an expression of our love for our person. And I don't mean literally like saying I love you, but it's a manifestation is probably a better word, that if we are there, we are having a relationship with our person. It's not a very pleasant part of the relationship while you're in the middle of that. It's not pleasant at all, but it's still part of your relationship. And just like all hard things in relationships, if you get through it with them, then afterward, there are benefits to be had. You know, like this is just absolutely how I feel about grief, that, and again, I want to be careful. I don't want people to think, oh, I just need to go have this bottomless pain and just, you know, be totally bereft to the point where I'm not okay. Well, yeah, for a minute, you know, but if you can't come out of that, or if you're traumatized or whatever, then that's what I mean. So I don't want to speak in absolutes here, like, oh, just walk into your pain, because we also need to learn how to step back from it in healthy ways. You know, so if we can learn to do it in ways that are not numbing, you know, like going to a peer grief support group, or talking to someone else, or finding comfort, or going for a walk, or, you know, just like 100 other self-soothing things that we can do. But it is my belief and my observation that if people are able to bear that pain in a healthy, supported way, let's put it that way, that they discover something. And this is the lesson you learned. You discover something deep about what your life means to you and what your person means to you. That's been my experience.
And, you know, I was thinking about the fact that many times when people are using alcohol and or drugs, they're doing it when they're alone, probably more so. And the fact that is, if you're involved in a peer support group, you're not alone.
Yeah,
so
well,
you've got people around you, and maybe that hopefully the tendency is to have a healthier journey through something that is really horrific. And there's
Yeah,
a lot of horrific
absolutely.
things in this world. But that's the value, I think, of support groups, is that you don't have to be alone. You don't have to be sitting there drinking yourself to sleep every night. You know, you can pick up the phone, you can call people, you can read our newsletter. One of the things that we are doing, we've just started, in fact, this week is pretty important week for us. We have started to, our training, we are having a program called Caring Friends. So we are, this is a special personal outreach by phone to people who are really struggling and have no support around them. And there are many of us that did not have, I wasn't one of them, I don't see us, I say as a whole here.
No, right.
Who don't have people around them, who don't have any kind of support. And they are very vulnerable then, especially to alcohol, drugs, deep depression, and another suicide death. And, so these are people that have called us already and asked us for help, but also acknowledged that they're very much alone in their grief. So we're hoping, this is a one-year project.
And you call it
Franklin. We're calling it Caring Friends. We just had our first
well, that's
training sessions.
That's
so they're going to have a one-on-one
interesting
relationship. But so we got a grant for it. So I'm really excited to get more people to volunteer. So so
Susan's trying to get a word in.
Yeah, and I hopefully it's going to be we're going to be able to prove with data that it really does make a huge difference.
Well, I wish you the best. We can talk more about that. We're doing something similar in a very small way. So that doesn't surprise me, Marilyn, that we're doing something similar, but we'll talk more about that.
We're determined, aren't we? So I'm going to say something at the very end about how our lives have changed. But Susan, do we have any questions from anyone? Oh,
yes,
good.
I do have a question. So John asks, what methods do you recommend to a peer support group for helping someone confront their grief rather than engaging in a mind-numbing or avoidance activity? What methods do you recommend to a peer support?
Well, you know, I don't know if it's so much a matter of methods, but what I recommend in peer support groups, what I think helps people specifically with this and confront their grief. I mean, that is what peer support groups are for. So here's what I'll just make a general statement, and I think this applies to all things about grief. If I'm in a peer grief support group and I say what my experience really truly is, whether I feel guilty or whether I'm angry or whether my pain is unbearable or whether I think I'm crazy or whatever it is, if I have a place where I can say what my experience actually is and people around me go, yeah, I get that. All right. Yeah, that happens to us. If I can do that and then listen to other people do that without judgment, without people telling me, well, here's what you should do about that, or here's how you should think about that, or here's what that means, or whatever, but just each person telling their story. All right, this is what I'm actually experiencing. So if people tell that, and then they tell both what's not working for them, you know, like if people are there and somebody says, hey, I'm drinking and this is happening, if that's the topic, people are going to say what they're doing. So that's what I would say, is that if we can, I really think that we talk about three things in support groups when support groups work their best. We talk about what's happening to us, we talk about what we're doing about it, and when we talk about what we're doing about it, we talk about what works for us and what doesn't work for us. Not other than that, talking about themselves and nobody judging them, and you do that for 75 minutes, if alcohol or other numbing behavior is a topic, somebody will get some big time help for it. Because people will say, yeah, when I first went, I was like, you know, I always had a glass of wine every evening, but I started to have a bottle of wine, you know, and then this happened and that happened, and this is how I got help, and this didn't work. And then somebody else says, yeah, I'll tell you that shopping thing, or, oh, I was a workaholic. I just went to work and that's all I did until, you know what I mean, what I did. And so I think that that is really the magic of peer grief support groups, is that people get to say what they are actually experiencing. And sometimes we say the most things that we are not allowed to say anywhere else but among ourselves. You know, we're not allowed to say, I am so angry at my person that I can't even stand it. You know, my person abandoned me, you know, just like whatever it is, you know, and people go, yeah, I hear that, you know, and here's what I did about it, you know, and then 3 other people say, this is what my anger was like. It's different than yours. What I did about it's different than yours. But if you get that going,
You're helping one another. You're helping
that's
one
my
another.
theory about how peer grief support groups work. It's about being able to say not just what you think, but being able to say, being able to weep, and just having people give you the time, you know, to weep however deeply you want, and just love you, and wait until you're done instead of interrupting you or trying to fix you or whatever. Just let you have your feelings. That's what I think support groups do when they're functioning at their best. And I'm talking about peer grief support. That's the only thing I talk.
Well, that's what we do.
Is both on peers.
Okay.
That is the drill.
Are there any
basically.
other questions, Susan?
I don't have any at the moment, but I just wanted to comment on what Franklin just said. Marilyn and I personally had an experience with a young lady that came to one of our meetings recently that really just couldn't talk. It was just too soon. And one of our, a person kept asking her questions and she just couldn't talk. She just couldn't do it. So
yeah.
I followed up with her and I called her the next day. And we always say there's no pressure to share your feelings, but I did call her and we talked. She called me Saturday. We had a really nice long conversation on Saturday. And she said that even though she couldn't say anything, she felt a little embarrassed that nothing could, I mean, you open your mouth and nothing comes out. I mean, you just can't.
Yeah.
But she said being with us and hearing what all of us were saying, just like you said, was very helpful for her. And so she and I kind of talked about different options for her to, you know, what might be helpful. And she was very appreciative and she was fine, but she says, I just couldn't say anything. Nothing was coming out. And I said, well, because this is awful. This is just awful. You know, so it was, so what you said is absolutely right. Even if no one says anything, it's still, she really got a lot out of it. She found it very helpful.
Yeah. So being in the company of people who have suffered what you are now suffering, just being in their company. And again, it's got to be in a healthy environment and, you know, have some safe, you have to be in a safe place and all that. Just, I will never forget the feeling. I mean, I don't remember the details of my first peer grief support group, but I'll tell you, those first 2 or 3 I went to, I will never forget the feeling overall that I had just spent hours with people who had suffered this thing, you know, and we're talking about it and we're trying to, you know, sort their way through it. So yeah, so just like in a support group, well, again, I would say, like we kind of warn people about asking questions of the person who's sharing. And again, I don't mean there's an absolute, you can't ever ask a question or whatever, but you know that once you've asked the second or third question, that it's about what you want to know, not about what they want to say, you know. So again, and again, I'm not trying to make like questions are forbidden because a follow-up question or this or that, but it never fails that if you ask more than 1 or 2 questions, or if the group does, then you're questioning the person. You know, so and that can be helpful too, but that's not really what we do in peer grief support, or we try not to. Again, everything, you know, has some flexibility and everything's organic, but yeah.
Is there any other questions? If not, I've got a couple things I could ask.
No questions right now. So go ahead, Marilyn.
So Franklin, tell me how has this new life, I mean, you and I both had not planned to live our lives like this. We had never planned. This was not on our bucket list, is something I say. You know, if Stephen hadn't died, I wouldn't be doing this. There would be no reason to do it. I wouldn't have any inkling that even that's something I should do. I mean, I didn't know I had this capacity to even do it. You know, you just jump in and you did it because you kind of felt a nudge that you needed to do something, maybe, kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like, but, you know, I have found that I have met such wonderful people, and like you, I mean, really, it's a blessing to me to have known you, Franklin.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you too. Yeah.
the thing is that it's changed our lives immensely. But I think it also changes everybody's life to some extent.
Yeah.
It's just that you and I are probably the extreme examples of what
I mean,
changed our lives. I mean, I envisioned when I was younger, you know, I'd just be home and I'd enjoying 19 grandchildren that I have, and I've got 14 great grandchildren, and I don't have time to bake cookies for them. I mean, you know, that's just out of the question. So it's like, it's not the life I thought I was going to have at all. And yet,
I hear that.
I have had experiences that have been absolutely fabulous, because when you work in this field, and especially as peer support, the people you run across are loving, caring people. And they're the best people. They care so much. They care so much about the person that died. They're compassionate. They're loving. They will go the extra mile. They'll give you the shirt off your back. They'll do anything. And so we have the luxury of being surrounded by the most fabulous, interesting people from so many different walks of life, so many different experiences, and so much honesty in sharing and talking, and no judgment. Just the most wonderful people call us. Now, I'm not too sure about the people who don't call us. I don't know if they're in their closets drinking,
I don't know either.
or if they just said good riddance. I mean, you know, there's a whole variety of responses we can have. But when you're doing this work, it is absolutely amazing to me, the caring and the loving that people have, their willingness to reach out to other people, to do everything they possibly can to make this place a better place, and to care about other ones and lift them up and do whatever. They're just amazing. And we've met some famous people, Franklin. We've done some famous stuff, working with SPAN on the board of directors. I mean,
all that has been
as
amazing.
survivors, we were in Washington, D.C., and we were
all that.
We were
it's been an amazing.
Yeah.
Well, let me try and answer the core question that was in there, you know, which was about this being a transformative experience, you know. Now, you know, we've carried that way too far, Marilyn, where, you know, when we talked about this a little bit before this went live, where, you know, we became this became part of our identity in a way that doesn't happen to every person, I mean to say. But also that happens to tens of thousands of people who are affected by something. They become advocates, or they become healers, or, you know, so that's a common experience as well. But by far and away, the vast majority of people don't go down that road, the, you know, change the world road, or the, you know, advocate or prevention road, or whatever. The vast majority don't go down that road. But grief is still, or can be, a transformative experience. Everybody who's lost someone to suicide knows exactly what I'm talking about when I say we divide our world into two parts. The world existed before that day when my person died, and the world that exists now, okay? So who I was then and who I are two different people. And I have, through my grief journey, wherever that takes me, you know, I don't have to change the world, you know, I just have to live my life. But who am I now? through my grief journey, what is my transformative experience? You know, and it doesn't have to be all flashy and, you know, make the papers or anything like that. Just living a good life and doing what you do with integrity or whatever your thing is. That's what our person, or I shouldn't speak for other people, you know, whatever, if I had done something else besides that, besides what I do, I would hope that I could say to my dad, figuratively speaking, you know, that I reached some degree of mastery over what I did, and that I had some degree of integrity in what I, you know, those kinds of things. Well, that's the transformative experience that we all can have, no matter if it's flashy or not. Just living your life is your job. That's your job as a bereaved person. Your job, you don't have to do anything else. You go live your life. You know, that's the main job that you have.
But it has been an amazing journey, hasn't it, Franklin? And it continues.
It still is.
It still is. Yes,
we forgot to retire, Marilyn.
Not quite yet. I've still got some ideas in my head of things like I'd still like to try to do to come up with something creative that make another difference. So we'll see about
thank you.
Yeah. So I'll talk about what you're
you
doing too, about that. But anyway, there's still a lot to do, and you know, our goal is, and with Susan Reynolds' help, you know, it is that this organization continues on long after I'm gone.
Yep.
Because, you know, like I kind of jokingly say, we're never going to be out of business. And the need is always going to be
I'm afraid not.
The need is always going to be there. And, you know, most people don't want to do this. Unless you've had a suicide death, why would you want to work like this? You know, because for other people on the outside, it looks like such a sad thing. How do you do that? But they don't realize that you see a sad person that calls you, and you see them or talk to them, and down the road, they say you've made all the difference, and they're smiling, and they're living a healthy, productive life again, and they're not being destroyed by the alcohol and the drugs or the shopping and all the other things that could have destroyed them. And so you know, it is a good feeling for us. I mean, I think I get more out of this than I give. For absolutely. So, and just getting to know you and many of the other people that we know, there's a group of us that know each other pretty well.
Absolutely.
And that has been a huge blessing in my life. I just, So it's such a joy to work for you.
Thank you for this opportunity to have a conversation. And Susan, thank you so much for your help and your work. I really appreciate it. By coincidence, I got my newsletter today in the mail.
So, you did. That's her creation. She's in charge of that, and she does such a wonderful job.
Yeah.
You know,
absolutely.
Grief is hard, but she puts this beauty into it, so it isn't so hard. If you get a little bit of beauty in the midst of your grief, it can make it a little bit easier.
Absolutely.
A little bit easier. So thank you so much, Franklin. I look forward to talking to you some more.
Thank you so much.
And I appreciate your willingness to come on. And
thank everybody who came. I so appreciate it. It's really strange just to talk into the void and not know. I mean, there's an audience out there, and I just appreciate you making time to come. Well,
I appreciate you doing it because you did it for free too. Again, that's what we do.